aggressive and very confident, because they had to be. A wonderful photograph. I can start to rant and rave about some of these photographs, and I hopefully will, but here you have the very first plane actually lifted into the air at 9:47 p.m. on the 5th of June, 1944. If you Google first plane Joel Crouch, this gentleman here, you can see unbelievable color footage of the first Allied plane taking off in England in the dusk. It's a beautiful color film. This guy's a badass. He's a true badass. He became a United Airlines pilot after the war. Of course, all United Airlines pilots are amazing. But he is the, this is a Pathfinder unit. And he had been in the first plane in North Africa in 1942 for Operation Torch. Let's not forget we dropped the 82nd Airborne in November 1942. This is a long time before the one and only D-Day of World War II. First plane, North Africa, 1942. First plane, the pilot of the first Pathfinder plane, Sicily, 1943, July 1943. Again, numero uno, the guy in the first plane to lead an invasion, Salerno, that's number 3. And obviously, first pick for the most ambitious invasion, we can say, of World War II. Perhaps the most significant. Look at the plane. You see the white paint there. Those are the Overlord markings. And the paint, if you turned around, if Crouch turned around and touched that paint, his hand would be white. Over 20,000 gallons of white paint used to mark the invasion planes. And they had to do it very close to takeoff, literally within 24 hours of takeoff because of security concerns. We didn't want the Germans knowing what our code colors were. So here is a photograph of the very first of you, the very first Americans to put their lives on the line to liberate the place that I love almost as much as this country, because I'm a European. I've been here 31 years, but I call myself an Englishman, but I'm also a European. And these men were the first from this country, from the United States of America, to put their lives on the line to liberate the continent that I love from untold evil. And some of you are sitting there thinking, oh my God, he's already talking in cliches, untold evil, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'll remind you that in the summer of 1944, in July 1944, 500,000 of you human beings were killed at Auschwitz in less than 6 weeks. That's you and you every single second. Untold evil. 19 million of me dead. 19 million civilians in Europe dead by 1945. Untold evil. The first, the very first to go. And that's their commander, a guy called Frank Lilliman. He did, I can't remember the exact number of practice jumps that he made. I think it's around about 47, 48. It's a lot. And on every practice jump, he had a stogie in his mouth, except for one. And this practice jump was made in early April of 1944. And a guy in the C-47 who was looking at Lilliman, Lilliman's always at the front, about to jump first. That's the definition of leadership. And on one occasion during their practice period, he was standing there at the open door of the C-47, and he forgot to put his stogie in his mouth. And so one of his men said, Captain, where's your cigar? Where's the stogie? Because everybody was superstitious. And they always jumped with him with the stogie in his mouth. And so he put his stogie in his mouth and was the first American to land on D-Day, coming from the air. He was a commander of a Pathfinder group in the 502nd PIR of the 101st Airborne. And we all know who the 101st Airborne are, don't we? Oh, thank you. And you won the war pretty much single-handedly in Europe. And then you went to the Pacific and you finished off Tojo without any help from any other American unit or country, any of the 27 allies that fought with you in World War II. Anyway. So when he landed, when he jumped out of a C-47 not far from Saint-Mère-Église, when his boots touched the dew-soaked grass of Normandy, he officially, in 1944, became the first American to land on D-Day. Badly wounded later on the day of the 6th of June, 1944, sent back to England. He went AWOL, was demoted because he went AWOL, but the reason why he went AWOL was because he wanted to get back in the action with his men. And he fought all the way through Battle of Normandy, Market Garden, and also the Battle of the Bulge. First of you. So the question arises because you can tell that I haven't quite lost my English accent. I've tried for 31 years to retain my English accent because it's the only thing I have. Every morning I sit down and I say, "How now, brown cow?" I'm trying to sound like Prince Charles. So the question arises because obviously I'm English. Who landed first? Was it you guys or was it us? So it's kind of a draw right now. It's a tie. You call it a tie, don't you? We call it a draw. So at exactly the same time that the 101st Airborne drop in 50 miles from where this painting depicts, you have the Ox and Bucks, the D Company, 2nd Battalion, Oxford and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, and they are landing here in 3 gliders at Pegasus Bridge. Those of you who've been to Normandy, this is a kind of obligatory stop. You have to go here. And if you're British and you go to Normandy and you don't go to Pegasus Bridge, you will be sent home and immediately shot. Because this is perhaps the most legendary, the most celebrated coup de main in British military history. Gliders from 4,000 or 5,000 feet with very thick cloud cover below them. Gliders with pilots that only have a stopwatch and a compass to guide them, are towed across the English Channel, and then have to hit this key objective here called Pegasus Bridge. We codenamed it Pegasus Bridge. Point being that we have to take the Caen Canal here, and we have to hold it in the event of fierce German counterattack. This is the far eastern end of a 50-mile bridgehead in Normandy. We're at the far eastern end. There's a canal there, the Caen Canal. We have to take the bridge, hold it, to prevent the Germans counterattacking and wiping out British and Canadian troops at Sword and Gold Beach. And it's left to the Ox and Bucks to land early on D-Day, literally at 15 minutes past midnight, and seize this bridge. 30 guys in the back of a C-47, they're performing what's called the butcher's grip. A butcher's grip. They're sat there on benches and they're gripping each other's hands so that when they crash land at 100 miles per hour, they won't be thrown everywhere and there won't be too many casualties. They crash land. The skid here is what they use to land, not the wheels. That's an ornament, never used. They crash land at 100 miles an hour. Their leader is thrown through the front window, and remarkably, the men from these 3 gliders here cross the bridge, landing at 12:15 a.m., and by 10:25, 10 minutes later, that's more than the length of time I've been boring you this morning. Within 10 minutes, they complete the first mission that is officially a success on D-Day. And the code words go out, the famous code words go out, ham and jam, ham and jam. Ham being the code word for one bridge here, and jam being the code word for the other bridge over there, just off the picture here. A very successful, important operation, and also involved the first Allied fatality on D-Day. Lieutenant Den Brotheridge shot in the head just as he crossed the bridge next to the first building officially, the Café Gondry, to be liberated on the 6th of June, 1944. He had a 2-year-old child. So moving on to this crazy Englishman, this nutty, mad Englishman. Just now I've asked the question, who was first? And the bragging rights are important when it comes to anything to do with us English. We care. Who was first? Americans, Canadians, French, the British? But I'm boiling it down to who was first, me or you. I'm making it personal. You guys or us? And in fact, I have to reveal that in fact it was us, British, that were first. Sorry about that. This is a guy who belongs to the SAS. You may have heard of them. They are a very, very elite, to this day, military force. He's a concert pianist. He's an absolutely fantastic pianist before the war, and he belongs to the SAS, and he belongs to a decoy unit that actually jumped out of a C-47 officially at 12:12 a.m., beating you guys by 3 minutes. He jumps out of a C-47 and he's holding a gramophone. And there are 4 or 5 other guys in his unit, and he lands with the gramophone, and all around him in the sky are Ruperts. Now, these are not posh English public school boys called Rupert. You'd have to be very English to understand that humor. You know, if you're Rupert, you're an aristocracy, basically. These were not public school boys, but they were mock paratroopers, about a foot tall, mock paratroopers. And thousands of them were dropped at the same time as his unit. Point being is that they want the Germans to think that an entire regiment or a battalion is dropping out of the sky, not just a bunch of toys. He gets to the ground, he opens the gramophone, and he starts playing the sounds of war on the gramophone. Again, to make the Germans think that an entire battalion or regiment have dropped, not just 5 crazy English guys. And in fact, it worked. Troops were transferred, moved from Saint-Mère-Église toward where they thought a whole bunch of crazy limeys had landed, playing their records and surrounded by toys falling from the sky. This is an interesting gentleman. He had a sports scholarship to the University of Maryland. He was a fantastic baseball player, not a bad football player, but he was a very, very good pitcher. And he officially, this is according to reports in June of 1944. So if you look in Life magazine, look at the New York Times, Lilliman, this guy, others I'm talking about, were in official reports as being the first. They had to humanize the story of D-Day, had to personalize it. And one way of doing that was to say, well, who was first on D-Day? Who was first? He belonged to the 8th Infantry of the 4th Infantry Division. Something to think about here. Utah, almost 30,000 of you, 30,000 Americans landed on that beach. 30,000. Casualties? Killed, wounded, taken prisoner? 197 from almost 30,000. This is the great success story of any amphibious invasion of World War II. You nailed it. Absolutely fantastic job. It's an extraordinary statistic. When you compare it, 197 casualties, killed, captured, wounded, with Omaha Beach, where you have at least 900 killed on 6th of June, 1944. He looks over his left to his right as he comes in a landing craft, and over to his right he sees a different company, and then he sees the landing craft ramps come down, and after about a couple of minutes, as he's wading through the waters onto Utah Beach, this is a seawall, which was the first objective, he looks over and he sees this old geezer, not a guy, it's an old geezer, which is British for an old bloke. It's an old guy. I've used geezer and bloke. It's an old man. Younger than me. Believe it or not, I'm only 59. You should think, oh, no way, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yes, of course. You look older than that. But the oldest officer, the oldest soldier on D-Day was Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was not deputy division commander. He was the assistant division commander of the 4th Infantry Division, 54 years old. A bad ticker, a bad heart, arthritis, could barely walk more than 100 yards. Should not have been there. Oldest officer, oldest soldier for more than 150,000 Allied troops on D-Day. But because of his name, I mean, Roosevelt helped. Of course, because of his name, because he begged over and over again to go in with his troops, he was allowed to do so. And he literally was in the first wave. There's no other example I can find where you get such a senior officer, a general officer, landing in the very first wave. It's as if he had a death wish. Schroeder knew him well, and Roosevelt actually nicknamed him Moose because he's so muscled, so big, such a great athlete. And so when the first of you lands on Utah Beach, and he looks over, he sees this old guy coming out of a landing craft onto the beach, hobbling with his walking stick. It's a famous scene from The Longest Day, the movie based on Cornelius Ryan's book. And Schroeder looks over, and he said after the war, he obviously survived, he said after the war, I just couldn't believe it. Here's this guy, and he's hobbling across this beach, giving instructions, shouting at men, etc. And so he gets onto the beach, and when he gets off the beach, and I've often been to the exact place where he left the beach, he officially became the first American not only to put his boots on French sand at Utah Beach, or in France rather, but he also leads the first escape or exit from Utah Beach. Badly wounded around about midday on the 6th of June, 1944. He's hit in the shoulder, upper arm here, around about the shoulder with a bullet from an MG-42 machine gun. MG-42 machine gun, without getting too nerdy, it's probably the most lethal weapon certainly on Omaha Beach, responsible for most of the 900 who were killed, and it was a thing that you feared, the buzzsaw, Hitler's buzzsaw, capable of 1,500 rounds per minute. You couldn't press the trigger for a minute because the barrel would burn out. So you did it in bursts of three, for 3 or 4 seconds, gave it a breather, and then you carried on killing Americans. Fired 3 times faster than any weapon that we had that we could carry. They had wonderful weapons, and they were ideologically very, very motivated. We never beat them. We never beat the Germans in a fair fight. When the odds were even and we didn't have typhoons and hurricanes and Spitfires and bombers in the air, when we had equal amount of artillery and it was mano a mano, we rarely won. They were that good. This is being colorized. It's a celebrated National Archives photograph, and I love it. I love it because it shows you some of the 16 million Americans who served in World War II, of which there are less than 35,000 breathing today. It shows you mostly working class Americans, the class that always wins and fights wars for this country, by the way. And everybody in this photograph is headed towards the second most lethal place that you could find yourself as an American on the most important day of the 20th century. Easy Red Sector, one of 8 sectors on Omaha Beach. And look at the picture carefully. This is a picture of American courage. And I don't like to use cliches and go on about honor, courage, valor, these sort of so-called sacrosanct values. This is the reality. That every guy in this picture, I would say, is going to be killed or wounded in the next couple of weeks. You're going to be extremely lucky. You've won the lottery if you're in that photograph and you come home without a leg, your soul, or half your mind missing. When we talk about the greatest generation, we're employing a book marketing term. Tom Brakauer's famous book, The Greatest Generation, and it has been wildly overused to the point where it's become a cliche. We hear greatest generation and we go, oh yeah, they're the best. My son's 27. I want his generation to be a great generation. What about the parents of these guys? What about the people that fought in the Revolutionary War, that maintained the Union? Let's not forget the importance of that during the Civil War. But yes, they were great, but they suffered enormously. This is another National Archives photograph. I was actually at the National Archives back in last October talking about this photograph. It's called The Jaws of Death. The subtitle is The Jaws of Death. And this is perhaps the most famous photograph of what it was like to arrive on Easy Red Sector. H hour, the moment at which you're supposed to arrive, is 6:32 a.m. Look at the photograph and then look across the beach and you'll see a lot of guys that are pinned down. Look how far they have to go. This is 300 or 400 yards with a 70-pound pack on your back. That pack's obviously going to get very wet. You're overloaded. You can barely run, let alone walk. And you've got to cross 300 or 400 yards of open ground. And all along those bluffs there are machine gunners. And within 20, 30 minutes, it's just target practice. Is a body quivering after that young man's been hit? Is it twitching as they bleed out? Bang. Get him. Today, you have 9,387 Americans buried atop the bluffs there. That's the Colville-sur-Mer American graveyard. And this is just below that on easy red sector of Omaha Beach. In my misguided youth, up until about a couple of minutes ago, my misguided youth, I decided to write a book about the gentleman who took this photograph, the greatest photographer, I would argue, of the 20th century. I'm very biased, but certainly, without a doubt, most people would say that Robert Capa, the life photographer, the Jewish-Hungarian emigre that covered the war from 1942 all the way to the bitter, bloody end, that he was the greatest combat photographer of the 20th century. And you can see why when you look at this photograph. He's got a 50mm lens on a camera that will only take 12 photographs, and then he has to change film. And he's not looking at a viewfinder with a digital image. If he messes up, he doesn't even know he's messed up. How close do you have to be to the first wave troops on Omaha Beach to get this photograph? You have to be as close as I am to you, madam. And he's not got a weapon. And he's the only person to be chosen to be in the first wave because he's the best. And he's done similar things before. So let's give you an emotional, hopefully an emotional feel for what it was like to arrive there just through these images. Big mistake. You don't cluster around defensive obstacles because that makes you a target. They're very unlikely to live. Big mistake. And there you go. That's a really beautiful record from history. This again is Omaha Beach. And if you look just beyond the water here, you'll see these figures along a shingle stone rise here. That's the first place that you stand a chance of breathing on Omaha Beach, or rather breathing anymore, where you can live, you can survive. You got to get across that open ground, and then you dive down and you put your face right into those rocks. And you don't lift your head more than a few inches because you'll be killed by a sniper. First place that you stand a chance of living. If you're smart, but not smart enough, you have this idea that maybe I would like to live, like to see my parents again, like to hug my kid. And they decide, you know, maybe my best chance is to go back in the water. But if you go back into the water, you've got a big problem. You can only literally lift your head back so that your nostrils are showing above the water so you can breathe through your nose. If you show more than your nostrils, you again will be shot. You will be killed. Some guys tried it, and they forgot only to breathe through their nostrils and to lean back in 6 or 7 foot waves, 57 degrees of water. You'll die of hypothermia if you stay there too long. That, along 5.5 miles, a beautiful crescent-shaped beach, which was called La Plage d'Or before World War II, a place where the French went on their holidays, les vacances. 5.5 miles of these obstacles as the Americans landed on that most fatal of shores. Up close and personal, indeed, another Robert Capa photograph. The last several have been from Robert Capa. These photographs didn't appear in Life magazine until the 23rd of June, 1944. These were not the days when you could live Facebook feed or Instagram feed or have a Twitter account of war. You had to wait a long time. Some of the relatives had to wait a couple of months to find out why their mail was not being returned from the European theater. They had to wait that long to find out what had happened to their sons. Who's this guy? When this image appeared in Life magazine, and these images were the first time that any Americans could see what actually happened on a landing beach on D-Day. The first time that you could get any kind of inkling about what had happened there. Many people claimed that that was their brother, their son, their cousin, doesn't matter. People wanted to say, hey, I know that guy. And in fact, after the war, there were several people that swore they were that gentleman there in the photograph. And in fact, we finally found out that it was this guy, Private Houston Riley F Company, 16th Infantry Regiment of the Big Red One. And I use this photograph not only because it's kind of neat to point out who the guy actually was, but also to remind you that this is his third first wave. This is the third time as an American in the European theater that he'd been in a landing craft in the first wave. North Africa, November 1942. Sicily, July 1943. And then Omaha Beach, 1944. Those are the three amphibious invasions of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. You probably recognize some of these characters here. You'll certainly know what Pointe du Hoc was, I hope. Bradley called it the most dangerous mission on D-Day. Cliffs that were, in some places, over 100 foot high. We sent in the 2nd Rangers under the command of this guy here, Earl Rudder. And they had to climb the cliffs any way they could and take out a German battery of guns that was pointed, we thought, at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. So Utah's here, Omaha's here, Pointe du Hoc is here, the guns point both ways, and we had to eliminate that gun battery because otherwise we'd suffer very high casualties on both beaches. When they got to the top of the cliff, the guns weren't there. This is the classic story of Pointe du Hoc. And so they were moved to a place nearby. But anyway, the story of Pointe du Hoc has become legend. It's an extreme example of ultimate heroism. Of the 225 guys that belonged to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, less than 90 could actually stand and fight by the end of June the 6th, 1944. This is a gentleman here that I write about in my book, Lieutenant George Kershaw, D Company. He became D Company commander around about 8 o'clock in the morning on 6th of June, 1944. And the reason why he became D Company commander is because every other officer in his company had been killed. That's him receiving a DSC. You'll see it on his combat blouse there. Earl Rudder also received the DSC that day. And this is 2 weeks after D-Day. And he held up the DSC in front of his men, the few that were still alive. And he had tears running down his face. And he said, "This is for you." And his men shouted back, "You keep it." Look at the youth in this man's face. Average age of an American killed in World War II is 22. By 1945, it starts to come down so that we end up being around about the same age as Americans were in Vietnam when they gave their lives for this country. 19, but this guy here is actually a lot older than that, a grandfather for those who served in World War II beside him, because he was 25 years old when he landed on Omaha Beach. Nightmares for months before D-Day. Waking up every night, convinced that he was going to die. Convinced, more interestingly for me, that he was going to fail. And this is the great fear. It's not what you think it would be. The fear isn't of death so much as the fear of failure. All combat commanders in World War II had, if they were decent combat commanders, if they were trained properly, if they'd been to the Citadel and other institutions, they shared the same fear that they would fail in the moment of truth. You can talk about war, you can have people like me, amateurs, walk back and forth on the stage and lecture you about the glories of military history and how important it is to train, 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 train. But actually, you don't know about anybody until the bullets start flying at you. That's the moment of truth. That's when you reveal who people really are. That's what fascinates me a lot about war. Who do you become? How do you behave? Who are you really when you are tested beyond the limit? He was a sports writer before the war. He landed on Omaha Beach in the first wave and went into the water. It was a 300 or 400 yard slog to get to actual sand. He went into a runnel, went under the water, somehow managed to get his pack off his back, got onto the sand, got across to that shingle rise that you saw, and then by around about 8 o'clock, he arrives at the top of the bluffs shown here. If you go to the top of the photograph, you'll actually enter into the Colville-sur-Mer graveyard today, and you'll see the first of the 9,387 graves there, about half the number of fatalities in the Battle of Normandy, American fatalities. This is the first exit. This is the first way out of hell, and he led the way. Either side of this path, which is now known as Spalding Path, and if you go to Colville-sur-Mer graveyard, you can go to the overlook, and you can actually see Spalding Path below you. It's called Spalding Path. Either side of the ropes here that have been placed there later on June the 6th, when they went up there, they were actually climbing, him and a platoon of 18 men that he led. They were climbing through a minefield. He fought through Normandy and actually was wounded in January 1945 after close to 300 days of combat. He was wounded and finally taken off the line. He also suffered in December of 1944, before he was taken off the line, he suffered psychological breakdown. He was taken off the line for a couple of days, given a rest, put back in, thrown back into the slaughter. And he was interviewed, interestingly and importantly, he was interviewed by a US Army historian in late March of 1945, and it was one of the most interesting and lengthy oral histories performed during the war. It's a very, very long document indeed, a fascinating document. And in that document, he remembers getting off this beach here. And he said, when I got off that beach, it was as if I'd climbed up those bluffs with an angel on each shoulder. How could we have lived? How could I have got off that landing craft, across that beach, up those bluffs, and I wasn't killed? Didn't even get a scratch. And how could I lead my platoon of 18 men? All of us got to the top, and we walked through a minefield. There was an angel on each of my shoulders. So he thought to himself, for the rest of the day and the rest of the time he was in combat, I am immortal. I'm immortal. And more importantly, in terms of our interests, in terms of the interests of Europeans who care about democracy and being able to vote and human rights and the rule of law, he thought he was God-given. He had been put on this planet for only one reason, to lead others in combat, because he couldn't be killed. Here's my favorite British hero, and I say British because he's actually Scottish. And if you know anything about us English, we don't like the Scots that much. We pretend to tolerate them because they're part of the United Kingdom, but we really don't like them. Am I allowed to say that? But I have to say that this gentleman here, he is extraordinary. This is Lord Lovat. He's an aristocrat. Has a Scottish estate, a hunting estate of over 20,000 acres. And he is a wonderful, wonderful poet warrior, a Spartan of the modern age. This photograph here is taken on his second day of combat in World War II. It's actually August 1942 when we decided to try an invasion at Dieppe. If you're Canadian, you can start throwing things at me because basically the story of Dieppe boils down to us British wasting an entire Canadian division in this practice invasion at Dieppe that had no point and was a complete bloody disaster with over 5,000 Canadians casualties, let alone those taken prisoner of war. One part of the Dieppe escapade, the Dieppe disaster that wasn't a failure, was the operation under the command of the greatest British commando in history, Lord Lovat, 28 years old. He landed with around 300 British commandos, took out a radar installation and a communications post, got back to the mothership where he's shown here with very important intelligence. Success. The one notable success from that escapade. And this is him shown here with his men in August of 1942. Second day of combat. The first had been in Norway. Not Hitler. Oh my God, I can't use that guy's name idly. Churchill said that he was the best-looking guy he ever came across that would slit your throat. The best, the most handsome guy who would slit your throat. Important to stress that. And actually, on the eve of D-Day, he stood in front of 2,500 men, 2,500 Brits, and a couple of hundred Frenchmen. And he addressed them, and he said, "You are the fine cutting edge of the British Army. Listen to me carefully. Tomorrow, every single one of you will get yourself a Hun. Every one of you has to claim a Fritz, a Bosch tomorrow." We often forget, I think I forget, maybe you do forget, that war is about killing people. As Patton said, and not enough people listen to him. If you want to win a war, it's very simple. You kill as many of the enemy as you possibly can, as quickly as you can. That's the way that your sons and daughters get to come home. As many as possible, you kill them. Germans had a slightly different philosophy, which was that they thought that if they wounded as many people as possible, it would tie down our resources, our medical staff, etc. But this guy belonged to the Patton approach to war. You kill as many as quickly, as fast as possible. Shock and awe. They carried a Fairbanks scythe commando knife. It's like a switchblade. And I remember when I was researching the book, I came across one of Lovett's men. And he had a Cockney accent. He talked like this. "All right, Axe? All right? Know what I mean? Geezer, all right?" So when we landed there, mate, when we landed in Normandy, we were taught that, you know, you didn't just thrash, you didn't stab and thrash like this with your knife, with your blade. You got the Hun, you got the Fritz, you pulled him onto you nice and easy, so you used the weight of his body against the blade, and then you finished him off. Cutthroat, killers, just like the 101st Airborne. We think these are nice citizen soldiers drawn from the ways of peace and democracy, as Roosevelt said. The best wanted to kill. They wanted to get the job done. They knew that killing meant success, meant victory, and it meant they carried on living. And there he is on the 6th of June, 1944. This is an amazing photograph, and it is. Think about it. You know, who took a photograph of Lord Lovat actually in action, leading his troops onto Sword Beach on D-Day, wading ashore? And who is this guy here? Who's this crazy guy here? Bill Millen, the only bagpiper on D-Day. From over 150,000 Allied troops, he's the only guy playing the bagpipes. Because he's not supposed to play the bagpipes. In the British Army, we had banned the playing of bagpipes in a combat zone because after World War I, it was after World War I, because in World War I, you start playing, you know, some Scottish tune, and you'd be killed quickly because you were giving away your position to the enemy. So we banned bagpipes throughout the British Army. Lovat called Millen to him just before the invasion, and he said, "You're going to play the bagpipes. As we're in the landing craft on the beach, you're going to play it whenever I point to you. You stay right by my side, and you're going to play whenever I say you're going to play. You can choose the tune, but you're going to play the bagpipes." And Millen said, "Sir, with all due respect," or words to this effect, "I can't do that. The rules say in the British Army that I cannot play the bagpipes." And Lovat turned to him and said, "You've forgotten something. I'm Scottish. You're not in the British Army now. You're under my command." Millen clearly lived because of the anecdote I've just given you, but he said that when asked about this photograph in particular, he said that the reason why Lovat was ahead of him, not only because he's a good leader and he goes first, but because he said, you know, I turned to Lovat and he sort of said, "Hey, you know, go ahead." And instead, I decided that I would let him test the water, see how deep it was. Came up to his waist. Millen also said that he was wearing a kilt. So we have two unique factors here, a bagpipe and a kilt. And let's not forget that it's 57 degrees. And let's not also forget that true Scotsmen never wear anything under their kilt. I mean, if you know a true Scotsman, they will hopefully boast about that. And so anyway, I won't go to the logical end of what happens when you get into water with 57 degrees and etc. I have done that before, but it leads to inappropriate statements about the size of certain peoples, etc., etc. He did say that when he got into the water and he started to wade across towards the shore, that the kilt rose up in the water, and it was as if it was like a tutu around him in the water. Unbelievably, he gets onto the beach and he walks back and forth at least 3 times on that beach under fire, playing the bagpipes. And by midday, he and Lovett have arrived at Pegasus Bridge, which I showed you just before. It's around about 8 miles inland, and that was their key objective. Soldiers, commandos from the landing beach link up with airborne forces dropped inland. That's a very important link up, and it's an important part of the D-Day story. Just as the link-up between the 101st Airborne and the 4th Infantry Division was a very important strategic tactical objective on June the 6th, 50 miles away to the west. And here's my ugly mug with the second Frenchman. Think of that, the second Frenchman to land on D-Day. He was part of the French commando force that served under Lord Lovett. Of course, we didn't allow any Frenchmen to serve under any other force on D-Day. They had to be under our strict, rigid control. Just off to the left of this gentleman here, this was taken in 2016, is a green beret for the British commandos. And it was the thing that he loved most in his life, apart from his daughter here. When I interviewed him, I leaned over and tried to touch his beret, and he literally slapped my hand. No, absolutely not. He was the second of 197, we believe, Frenchmen landed on Sword Beach under the command of Lord Lovett, and he was the second Frenchman to actually liberate his own country. He joined the Free French Forces in 1941, had come over to England, joined the commandos, volunteered for the commandos, and was part of a French force that actually got to invade their own country and set their own country free on D-Day. He's only about 5'5", 5'4", 5'5". And when I interviewed him, he said to me, Alex, you wouldn't have lasted very long on D-Day. And I took that as a kind of obvious statement of fact. He said, you're too tall. The trick was for him, and this is exactly what he did on June the 6th, 1944. He said, when we got off the beach, our adrenaline was pumping so fast, we were so jacked up on adrenaline and fear, that we had Tommy guns. And I remember, he said, I remember distinctly firing at anything that moved. Anything that I thought that moved, I fired at it. And I kept my finger on the trigger. And so I was going through ammunition like crazy. And he said, I remember, Alex, distinctly, this British officer coming over and literally shouting in my ear because the noise was so loud. He said, single shots. And he said, oh, yeah, obviously. If I keep firing like this, I'm going to run out of ammunition, and then they're going to kill me. He gets down. He said, the trick to staying alive there was luck, but also you have to get as low as possible and run as fast as possible while you are as low as possible and fire at the same time. Single or 2 shots at most. For almost a mile, 10 German pillboxes, he and the commandos with him went along that beach that morning. The first of 137 days of combat in World War II. The problem with talking about D-Day and making it just June the 6th, 1944, is not only do we insult those who were in many amphibious invasions in the Pacific by using the words D-Day to refer to just one day, one invasion in World War II. That's the only invasion that most people know about. But we also forget that anybody who landed on any one D-Day, a day of operation is basically what it means, it was their first day. So apart from the 1st Infantry Division, and the 82nd Airborne Division, every other American involved in D-Day, it was most likely their first day of combat. And this is 6th June 1944, and the killing is not going to end until the 7th of May 1945. Some of these men I've shown you have got an awful, awful long way to go. The objective is Berlin, and they've got a long way to go. And this is their first day. We forget that. And so if you look at the photograph carefully, and you see the oil painting behind Léon Gautier. He died 3 years ago, and when he died, he was the last of the 197 Frenchmen to pass away. Can you imagine being an American, the last of the Americans who got to fight to liberate this country, who'd landed on a shore in New Jersey in 1944 and started to liberate this great country from Nazism? Imagine being that guy, a Frenchman, a living god, and you're the last to pass away. He gets an obituary everywhere in France and also the New York Times, etc. But look at the painting behind his head there. That's actually a painting of a beach around about a mile away, where for 2 or 3 decades he walked his dog. It's actually the beach where he landed. It's the exact spot where he landed. So he survives D-Day, fights for 137 more days, goes back to England, marries this beautiful English woman here, sorry, her mother, and then comes back to France and starts a business in Ouistreham, the place that he actually liberated in 1944. And that's the painting there of the beach. Quickly, I'm coming toward the end now. This is one of the famous D-Day shots. This is what it was like to be British at Sword Beach, one of the 5 invasion beaches. This shows you some of the intensity, men actually being shot. This is what it was like to come ashore at around 8 a.m. on D-Day. H-hour for the British and Canadians was an hour ahead of you guys. So the Utah Beach, Omaha Beach at 6:30, 6:30-ish, and for us it's 7:30 because of the tides, etc., gave us that extra leeway. There are the Canadians. Let's not forget that the Canadians, by every man in this photograph here and every man who landed on Juno Beach, the second most deadly invasion beach, they were all volunteers. And Canada had been in this war since 1939. So second highest fatalities of any beach is Juno Beach. It's around 300 Canadians killed. Still a third of what you lost on Omaha Beach. And this is taken from a movie reel. It's actually the only live film taken on D-Day of the first minutes of the invasion on any beach. This gentleman here has his head in the air over here. He had to have his head there because he has to see where he's landing these troops. Some of you may recognize the gentleman standing here. It's Omar Bradley, commander of US forces on the ground on D-Day. This is taken around about 11 o'clock in the morning. They're about 5 miles from Omaha Beach. And this guy is extremely worried. He's a good leader. You have to be a good actor to be a good leader, certainly in combat. You must never, ever show panic or excessive fear because it's infectious and you will fail. You have to be a great actor. You have to control your emotions. You have to regulate your emotions extremely well. If you want to learn how to behave, how to lead, go into combat and keep everybody, avoid panic. Keep your men together. It takes extraordinary skill. He's looking out and he's receiving radio reports, and one report has come from Omaha Beach, and it's from an officer in the 1st Infantry Division, and the report was, "We are being slaughtered like hogs. Butchered like hogs." Every radio report, and this is, by the way, again, I'll stress, is around about mid-morning on June the 6th, 1944. Every report coming to him is that this has been a bloody disaster, a terrible disaster. And guess who has to take responsibility? Guess who's in charge of this operation? And guess who's planned it? Omar Bradley. Imagine what he's thinking. What he's actually thinking, apart from, oh my goodness, this has been a complete disaster and I'm responsible and this will be the end of my career, is what do I do with the thousands and thousands of troops who have managed to get onto Omaha Beach? Do I let them stay and get slaughtered, or do I try and pull them off, and maybe even more will be slaughtered? There's one thing to land an invasion force, but to actually pull an invasion force off a beach under fire is probably going to be far more deadly than leaving them there. What does he do? So when we talk about D-Day, and we look back on it, and I say there was no plan B, and it was a highly risky operation, this shows you the moment in which history hangs in the balance. This is a moment where all of modern history in Europe hangs in the balance. Because if he does pull those troops off Omaha Beach, then I believe, and if you really look at the situation on the 6th of June 1944, D-Day would have failed. Thankfully, by around about 11:30, midday, he receives reports that the first American troops have managed somehow to fight their way off bloody Omaha. That Lieutenant John Spaulding and maybe around about 300 Americans have managed to push inland and establish some kind of footing in northern France, inland from Omaha Beach. So the argument that many people make that history boils down to important, significant individuals, that we can explain the existence of Western civilization to this day because of Winston Churchill in May of 1940, which isn't a bad argument, by the way. That history is about important individuals that making big decisions. It's not about all of us. Actually, this image here tells you about the incredible resilience and the importance of ordinary individuals who do extraordinary things at moments in history. Because those 300 young Americans who led the way off Omaha Beach, who walked into a storm of machine gun fire, who led other Americans off that beach, who went over to Americans paralyzed with fear and kicked them in the ass and took out their combat knives and used the blunt end to stab other men in their backs to make sure they weren't just lying there in fear, but they would actually get up onto their feet and walk toward death. Only way you're going to live, only way you could win is to actually walk into the bullets. Not back, forward. And so you have maybe 200-300 young Americans who did that, and made all the difference and saved the day on D-Day. Individuals matter, and courage really does matter. There you have the exits from Omaha Beach. And the thing to notice, there are 5 main exits. The bluffs are around about 100 feet, 80 to 100 feet high. Very different to Utah Beach, where the sand dunes were maybe 8, 9, 10 feet. 5 exits. We didn't take any from a frontal assault. Not one. If you went for an exit, if you performed a frontal assault on any one of those exits, you were ripped apart. There were penetrations inland around the main defensive areas. These are the red are the German defensive places, and then you see the breakouts here. Just a few statistics. I hate to get lost in maps and dates and statistics and strategy and tactics and archive records, because the story of war, the story of us, is about us, human beings. But here are a few statistics here. 4,700 casualties, over 900 killed on Omaha Beach. 116th Infantry Regiment from the 29th Infantry Division, the blue and the gray division. Blue and the gray because on their shoulder patch they had a blue for the Union and a gray for the South. I won't add defeated South, but that's about as an American a unit that you can get in US history. A combination of the defeated Confederacy and the victorious Northern Union forces. The patch on their shoulder showed that in 1944. In the weeks before they landed on D-Day, they were arguing with Northerners, the guys from the Virginia regiments, arguing with Northerners about who really had won the Civil War. And we all know that the South won the Civil War, don't we? That war of Northern aggression, that recent unpleasantness. 247 men killed from the 116th Infantry Regiment that dates back to the Civil War, part of the 29th Infantry Division. 2 divisions on D-Day on Omaha Beach, the 1st Infantry Division and the 29th Infantry Division. 29th Infantry Division was a National Guard-based division, drawing predominantly from Maryland and Virginia. A Company, the only infantry company 198 men strong, the only infantry company out of dozens on Omaha Beach to land at exactly the right place on time. Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach, one of the 8. It's the furthest to the west. And from 198 men, you had 102 killed in around about half an hour. Those of you who have seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, the first famous 20 minutes, that is the story of what happened to the Bedford Boys, to Company A on D-Day. If you look at the film carefully, you'll see patch of the 29ers and also the patch of the Rangers commingled. 102. By lunchtime on D-Day, 12 men from 198 could actually stand and fight. And from Bedford, Virginia, which is where A Company was drawn, a National Guard unit, Bedford had 3,000 people living there in that town in 1944. From Bedford, the town and the county around, Bedford County, 34 men out of the 198 came from this one small Virginia community, and of the 34, 19 were killed in about 15 minutes on D-Day. This is the extent of the Allied advance on D-Day. We didn't go that far at all. The main objective for the British and the Canadians is Caen, and this is about 12 miles from Sword Beach here. It was a key objective on D-Day. 6th of June. We didn't get there till the end of July, 1944. 7 weeks to go 10 miles. The Canadians were in the outskirts on the eve of the 6th of June. Look at the extent of the advance inland. The Canadians actually went furthest inland. Look at Omaha Beach here, and then look at Utah. And that's around 15 miles away. Had Bradley decided to pull off US troops on Omaha Beach, take out the gray area there, and look at the gap between predominantly airborne 4th Infantry Division troops over here and their nearest allies over there. It's a long way. Look at this dark, dangerous arrow here, 21st Panzer Division. When you get a full German Panzer Division, if you were unlucky enough to encounter one, they will shred you to pieces very, very fast. They got the best tanks, and they've actually arguably got the best leadership. And they have extremely ideologically motivated 15, 16-year-olds amped up on meth who've only known Adolf Hitler and will die for him until their last breath. Imagine a couple of other Panzer divisions piercing the gap between Utah and Gold. D-Day fails. Fails. Just a few statistics here. 156,000 troops. Casualties, that's the thing that I want you to look at just for a couple of seconds. 10,250 casualties. US forces were less than 50% of the Allied forces on D-Day. And we have to remember there were 27 allies of you on D-Day, that you never win a war alone. You've never won a war alone. Even the Civil War, you could argue that we came to your help at certain points. You only win war with allies, so be careful who you make your friends, and stay close, because you're always going to need them. Majority of the casualties, why? Because of the distortion of Omaha Beach. Sends US casualties far higher than the British and the Canadians. Quickly, this is the 8th of June, 1944. There's Earl Rudder with the arrow above his head. They landed at 7:30 a.m. on the 6th of June. Were relieved 48 hours later, fighting constantly against German counterattack after German counterattack for 48 hours. And they hadn't slept on the evening of the 5th of June. So some of the gentlemen that you see in this photograph here, Rangers from the 2nd Ranger Battalion, have literally been awake, apart from a cat nap for 10 minutes here or there, for 4 days. And they are finally relieved at Point de Hoc by men of the 5th Ranger Battalion and the 29th Infantry Division. And finally, my last image. We talk about D-Day, we talk about World War II, and we talk about the 411,000 of you who gave their lives to achieve what I believe was a miracle. Two things that you've done in your history that I actually admire enormously. Number one was kick us out. I do not believe in divine right, and I absolutely detest aristocracy or any attempt to recreate it. It's profoundly un-American. I do not want to live in a country where I have a king or a queen. I like having a written constitution. I like having a Bill of Rights. And I also like living in a country where the rule of law is paramount. Let's hope it stays that way. I like living in a country that's almost 250 years old. Congratulations. You have been the model for many people who actually revere freedom, who came to understand what it means to be a free citizen because of this country over the last 250 years. Congratulations. Dark chapters, we all have them, every nation. But look at what you've achieved. Look at what you've achieved. Second chapter in your history that I truly admire, and that non-Americans, people who were not born in this country, really do admire, is the Second World War. Because this is a chapter when you did something for other people, for generations not even yet born, like me, born in 1966. And I spent my entire life, and I'm 59 years old, living, enjoying a continent that has enjoyed freedom, that now is mostly united, prosperous, and for the longest period in recorded European history has not been at war. And to this very moment, as I speak to you, until this very moment, is still defended and protected by you. Set free in Western Europe by you. Defended, rebuilt, reconstituted, brought back from darkness, where civilization was reinstalled by you. Not by the Soviets, not by the communists, by you. And still, you pay to defend it. Thank you. These are the faces of American sacrifice on D-Day. 19 men from one small community, and this is the reason why the National D-Day Memorial, not the National World War II Memorial, who I work for, I have to stress that, why the National D-Day Memorial is in Bedford, Virginia, because Bedford, Virginia was the one allied community from all those many nations that suffered per capita the greatest loss on D-Day, per capita. And that's why the memorial is there. So I will wrap up now. I want to thank you for being a very good audience, and I want to stress one thing. History really does matter. I make my living from it, but that's not why I say that. If we don't study history as much as we possibly can, we don't know who we are. And if we don't know who we are, how can we feel proud, I would say, I would stress, to be Americans? We live in a culture and a time when we are falsely divided, when we are bombarded by useless messaging, when algorithms define how we behave. We live in a materialistic, narcissistic, consumption-obsessed age. But when we look at all history, when we look back and we think about what this country has done, maybe we should remember that in 1945 they took opinion polls, surveys, in democracies around the globe. And by the way, of almost 200 countries, there are only 34 today. The 34th is the Ukraine. They took opinion polls and surveys in 1945, and they asked this question: which country in this world, on this fragile planet, do you admire most? And the US was number one by a long, long way in 1945. The peak of your moral power and military power came at the end of World War II. And the world has been the great beneficiary ever since. Unless we know our history, unless we can be proud of our history, certain chapters, important chapters, how can we expect anybody to put on a uniform and actually give their lives for this country? That's taken for granted here at the Citadel, but it's not taken for granted almost anywhere else. If you don't feel proud of your country, how can we expect you to fight for it, defend it, die for it, or at the very least, improve it for a future great generation? History matters. And by teaching World War II, we could inspire people, truthfully, honestly, to feel proud of what this country has done for the rest of the world. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Welcome back. Hope everyone got to get some coffee and some food, and the same rules still apply. If you spill it in my floor out there, I'm going to be very upset. I'm honored to introduce the second part of our symposium today, which will be a panel discussion on the legacy of the greatest generation, personal reflections from the descendants of World War II heroes. The details are in your program, and I will introduce our moderator, and he will introduce the rest of the panel. I will tell you, he will also at one point in time ask for you to come forward for questions. There'll be a point in time when he'll allow you to come and line up in the front here where we've got some mics so we can ask questions. So be aware for that. About halfway through the program, you'll see that present, and we hope all of you will have some questions to ask. Let me introduce a very good colleague of mine and a friend of the Citadel, graduate of the Citadel, Mr. James Scott. James is a military historian, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and Citadel graduate, recognized for his extensive work on World War II. James is the author of several acclaimed books focusing on various aspects of the Pacific theater, including Target Tokyo, Jimmy Doolittle, and the Raid that Avenged Pearl Harbor, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. He's the author of The War Below, the story of 3 submarines that battled Japan, Rampage, MacArthur, Yamashita, and the Battle of Manila, which is quite a tragic book and tough to read sometimes, but outstanding writing, and Black Snow. And most recently, a book on the bombing of Beirut barracks, and I've forgotten the title of it, and James will tell you. James is a scholar in residence here at the Citadel. He is a graduate of our military history program online. He earned a Master of Arts degree from here, and he continues to support the institution in a variety of different ways, coming back to serve this alma mater. And so we're very glad to have James Scott moderate this panel on the legacy of the greatest generation. James.
Good morning, everybody. Brian, thank you for the warm introduction, and it's my pleasure to introduce my co-moderator, Dr. Kyle Sinisi. And I like to say that Kyle taught me everything I know about history. And there's a certain truth to that because he was my historiography professor here in the master's program a few years back, and also was my thesis advisor. And he has subsequently become a dear friend of mine, and along with many of the other history faculty members here, including Dr. David Preston, who's skulking about there in the back. Thank you, David. It's good to see you this morning. Kyle is a 1984 graduate of the Virginia Military Institute. He spent 4 years on active duty in the U.S. Army before moving on to Kansas State University, where he earned his master's and his doctorate in military history. Joined the Citadel faculty in 1994, where he teaches a wide variety of undergraduate and graduate level courses, but he concentrates mostly on the Civil War, on World War II, U.S. military history, and the history of weaponry. Kyle is a 2-time recipient of the James A. Grimsley Award, which is the Citadel's annual award for excellence in undergraduate teaching. He is co-editor of the Total War series line of books for the Rowan and Littlefield Publishing Group, and he is the author of The Last Hurrah, Sterling Price's Missouri Expedition of 1864, which won the A.M. Pate Award for Best Book of 2015 on the Trans-Mississippi Civil War. He's also the author of Sacred Debts, State Civil War Claims, and American Federalism, and is the co-editor of Warm Ashes, Issues in Southern History at the Dawn of the 21st Century. Kyle is currently at work on a biography of General Samuel R. Curtis and a study of Charleston during the Civil War. When he is not here on campus, he can often be found in his secondary office just a few blocks away from here at Home Team Barbecue.
There you go.
It is my pleasure this morning to welcome my good friend to the Citadel, Henry Sledge. Henry is the younger son of Eugene Sledge, the renowned U.S. Marine and author of the World War II memoir With the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, which is considered by many historians, myself included, to be the finest World War II memoir. Just last month, I was leading a tour on Okinawa, and with a bunch of guests, I stood at the overlook of Shuri Castle and pointed out the directions of where Henry's father was, and I read portions of his excellent book to help illustrate the horror of that brutal final battle of the Pacific War. Born in 1965, Henry grew up in Mobile, Alabama, immersed in his father's vivid recollections of the Pacific War. He recalls early memories of his dad writing by the fireplace, surrounded by the yellow legal pads and the small brown Bible, deeply engrossed in his thoughts. Henry's passion for World War II was nurtured through these intimate conversations and his own explorations of military history books and artifacts. He's contributed to the preservation of his father's legacy by working as a consultant for Valor Studios and publishing articles in Valor and Naval History magazine. In 2025, Henry authored The Old Breed, The Complete Story Revealed. It's a wonderful work that enriches his father's original memoir with previously unpublished material from the original draft and Henry's own personal anecdotes, which offer a much deeper and personal and intimate insight into Eugene Sledge's experiences during and after the war. I highly recommend reading that book. Beyond writing, Henry has co-hosted and appeared on numerous World War II podcasts, YouTube channels, and documentaries. He is a sought-after speaker as well for festivals and museums, including one of my favorites, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. It's an honor as well to welcome George Lutz Jr., son of technical fourth grade George Lutz Sr., a beloved member of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, which of course was immortalized both by Stephen Ambrose in his book and by HBO in the miniseries The Band of Brothers, which takes its name from Ambrose's book. Growing up in West Warwick, Rhode Island, George was immersed in the camaraderie and legacy of Easy Company from a very young age. At 9 years old, he attended his first 101st Airborne reunion in 1965, an experience that deepened his connection to the men who served alongside his father. After George Sr.'s untimely death in 1998, George Jr. committed himself to preserving and sharing the stories of the Easy Company. With his presentation that he gives often through My Father's Eyes, George offers audiences unique perspectives on the experience of Easy Company, enriched by personal anecdotes, photographs, and letters that he shares. He shared these stories at numerous events, including Veterans Day celebrations and historical society gatherings, and his dedication ensures that the sacrifices and bonds of the bands of brothers continue to inspire future generations. It's my pleasure as well to welcome Tracy Compton, the daughter of Lynn Buck Compton, a decorated World War II veteran of Easy Company, who is also very famously portrayed in HBO's Band of Brothers. Beyond the Band of Brothers, Buck Compton was a renowned litigator and an appellate judge who famously prosecuted Sirhan Sirhan for the murder of Robert Kennedy. So what a fascinating post-war period as well. After the war in 1947, Buck married Donna Newman, and the couple adopted Tracy and her sister Cindy. Over the years, both have played active roles in honoring their father's legacy, including organizing his 90th birthday celebration in January 2012, an event attended by family, friends, and members of the Band of Brothers. Buck Compton sadly passed away shortly thereafter, February 25th, 2012, at Tracy's home in Burlington, Washington. In his memoir, Call of Duty, My Life Before, During, and After the Band of Brothers, Compton expressed his profound love for his family, dedicating the book to them and describing them as, quote, the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Today, Tracy continues to preserve and share her father's story, ensuring that the legacy of Buck Compton and Easy Company endures for future generations. Lastly, I'd like to welcome Eugene Doc Rowe's grandson, Chris Langlois, who actively honors his grandfather's legacy by sharing his stories and insights about his time with Easy Company. A graduate of Louisiana State University, Chris frequently speaks at historical gatherings and commemorations, offering personal reflections on Doc Rowe's experiences. He's been an honored presenter at many different places, including at Camp Toccoa, at Currahee, and at the Bastogne War Museum. In addition, Chris is the author of How Easy Company Became a Band of Brothers, which provides an in-depth look at the experiences of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment and offers readers a deeper understanding of the humility, courage, honor, and sacrifices of these soldiers. In addition to live events like this morning, Chris has appeared on various media outlets to discuss his grandfather's legacy, ranging from YouTube programs to C-SPAN. So please join me in offering a round of applause to our presenters this morning as we dive into the echoes of Valor. Sort of start off this morning, thank you guys. You know, we wanted to sort of begin by asking you sort of, tell us about the beginning of your father's military career, sort of how they launched into what would become this incredible stories and legacies.
You want me to start with that?
Henry, jump on it first.
My father enlisted in the Marines in December of 1942. He was preceded by my Uncle Edward, who had graduated from here at the Citadel and had gone on into the 741st Tank Battalion. And so with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, my father felt drawn to somehow serve. And this was all portrayed in the Pacific miniseries, and there was some artistic license with that. Initially, he went to an officer training program at Georgia Tech. My grandparents implored him to not go in as an enlisted man. And so he did try to go through an officer training program. He was an impetuous youth, like most of the guys in his class were. They were afraid the war would get going without them, and so they, like a third of the detachment, purposely flunked themselves out. And then he was on his, and the deal was if you flunked out, then you matriculated into the Marine Corps as an enlisted man. And so a few weeks later, he found himself outbound on a train to San Diego, and as he said, if we had only known what we had just done to ourselves.
Yeah. George?
Well, my dad, he was born June 17th of 2021 in Fall River, Massachusetts. Not soon after that, his parents, who were Portuguese immigrants from the Azores, San Miguel, moved to West Warwick, Rhode Island. And after he went through the 11th grade in high school, he quit school. And not soon after that, he joined the military. Now, you know, some people look at that Reader's Digest. They said, oh, I read the Reader's Digest about the paratroopers, and it was so this and it was so that. Well, my father's family didn't have a subscription to Reader's Digest. So what he looked at was it paid extra money each month. So that was the reason why he joined, and the rest is history.
Yeah, so he didn't think about why he was getting paid extra, like jumping out of planes and stuff like
That's
that.
it. His dad didn't understand. But,
That's great.
But
That's great. Awesome. Tracy?
So my dad was enrolled at UCLA in the ROTC program and was playing football and played in the Rose Bowl. And then a few weeks later, shipped off or went to Fort Benning and went on from there and went over to England.
Gotcha.
Oh, am I not on? Well, am I supposed to do that?
Yes.
take two.
Yeah.
Go ahead, give it to us again.
Start. Oh. Well, we checked it.
That's on.
Oh, yeah, no, I think you're good now.
It's on. It's on.
All right, go right ahead. You want to do it again?
Do we want to do that over? 'Cause I can-
Yeah, can anybody
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
Tracy?
Could you guys hear okay?
Add to that. You were really loud.
Was I?
Well, you're George Les Jr., so by
Well, you
definition.
know, hey,
Let me get my,
Just fold it
do I
over.
look fat in this shirt?
Yeah. That's
You
good.
look younger every day.
let me
Anyway,
get my cool voice
All
on.
right.
Are we better?
I think we're better.
Yeah.
okay, cool.
All right, so tighten up. Here we go. Shoulders back and down, right? Abs in.
Okay,
Here we
all
go.
right.
So my dad was born the last day of 1921, and he was at UCLA, enrolled in ROTC, and he had done 2 years, but he opted to do the 4. And they were in the Rose Bowl. They played Georgia, and he celebrated his 21st birthday. And shortly after the Rose Bowl game, he got his orders to go to war. So he was in a different unit than the 101st. He had been in the 176 or something. And he went to Fort Benning, and he was in demolitions or something. But he was originally, they wanted him to play baseball because he was a real athlete. So he was embarrassed that he was playing baseball and not part of what was going to happen. He was afraid he was going to miss out on the action. So he was hoping to get some kind of a transfer. And he ended up over in Auburn and was able to join Easy Company. So that's, I wasn't there, but this is what I know. Thankfully, he wrote a book. He didn't tell us anything about the war growing up, and I'm sure we'll get to that question down the line. So that was his start.
So out of all y'all, I probably had the least amount of information about my grandfather because my grandfather did not speak about it hardly at all and died in 1998 before the series came out. So one of the millions of questions. What I do know is that he grew up poor. We have some pictures of him as a little kid and with this mischievous look on his face. But it's in front of a house that looks like a shack. So just grew up poor. His DD-214, we do have a copy of all the things that got burnt up in the St. Louis fire, but we have his DD-214. He had an 8th grade education, and his occupation was listed as a shrimp fisherman, which obviously qualifies him as a medic.
Shrimp around here are sacred. So
yes,
yeah.
no, don't believe me. Shrimp and grits yesterday.
Oh,
So
yeah.
fear not. A million questions of why did you join and how did you become a medic? Because I've talked to Doc Pepping, who filled out a questionnaire when he enlisted, and one of those questions was, could you kill a man? And he said no, and that's how he became a medic. And Spina, if you've seen the miniseries, was his assistant, especially in Bastogne. Spina said they just said, you're a medic, and he didn't have a choice. So I don't know, I'll never know, but it's just interesting when you talk about 11th grade and 8th grade education, that these guys did what they did from very poor, very humble backgrounds.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What I'm curious about is you grow up with these men as either your father or your grandfather, year after year after year, and then lo and behold, there they are being portrayed on the silver screen. What's it like then to go ahead and see that, and ultimately how does the man that you know compare to the man that's being portrayed on screen?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, go for it.
In 2010, when Pacific premiered, Tom Hanks, met him a couple times and talked to him a couple times, and he said, Henry, what is this like for you to see your father? How does this make you feel? And I said it was electrifying. But I knew my father pretty well. I was fortunate in that he and I were able to talk quite a bit about his World War II experience. And so none of it was news to me in that context, but to see him portrayed, and I had seen Saving Private Ryan, I'd seen Band of Brothers a million times. I knew every line in both the movie and the miniseries. And so it was a pretty incredible thing to know that the Hanks and Spielberg were going to pick up with The Old Breed and among two other books to be source material for a similar miniseries. Yeah, it was a pretty incredible experience, and I don't want to hyperbolize it. That doesn't mean it was a perfect experience, because there's always going to be artistic license. And I guess, and probably my colleagues up here viewed Band of Brothers with a critical eye. I looked at the Pacific with a critical eye because I just was so close to the story. And we had a lot of interaction. We'll probably get to some of this, a lot of interaction with the filmmakers through the process. But I'm going to encapsulate it by saying it was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah. One thing I'll jump in there and say, I rewatched episode 9 of the Pacific when I was getting ready to go over to Okinawa, which of course is your dad's experience on Okinawa.
Yeah.
And I had also, of course, gone back and reread big portions of the book in preparation for going over there. And what struck me was how much of the series is literally verbatim from your dad's book. It's basically anecdote after anecdote after anecdote from your dad's book. And so it pretty faithfully captured the Okinawa experience.
I definitely think it did. The rain and the mud and just the absolute deprivations.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on, but I'm not the only voice up here. So.
Well, no, I've been to the Pacific, and you're right about his dad's book. The historian I was with, Chris Anderson, there was many, many days, many passages that he read all about your dad's book. So,
Yeah.
it is the Bible.
Yeah.
It is the Bible. But in my particular case, it was very humbling to see my dad portrayed on TV, and it was pretty amazing. We just think 350 guys went through the unit, and they were unable to have 350 characters, and to have my dad as one of them was really pretty cool. And but yeah, so we were blessed. The kid who played my dad did an amazing job. Portrayed him very well. Writers do a great job of writing. Rick did a great job of acting. So there's a few scenes in there that people always recognize and always ask me, did your dad really do that? So, because not everything is true, but the scene about imitating Major Horton
The imitations.
was kind of the coup de grace, so to speak. Everybody remembers that scene. So I said, hey, yeah,
Favorite part.
that was my dad, and that did happen. And, we all had a chance to meet Captain Sobel's son, Michael, in the Phoenix reunion in 2002. And so anyway, he gave us a good outline of his dad. And but we had a good chuckle, him and I, about that particular scene and stuff like that. Although I don't think he was chuckling as much as I was chuckling. Tracy?
I didn't know a lot about my dad's war experience. He didn't talk about it. We knew he had a Purple Heart. But we didn't understand the significance of that at all. We knew he had been shot in the butt, and we actually thought it was kind of funny because my mom had told us he had 4 holes from 1 bullet. And so we kind of wanted to see what that looked like. We really did. We were just 2, young girls that, it wasn't creepy, but we just thought, oh, I wonder what that looks like. So we would hide in my mom's closet and try to see 4 holes from 1 bullet. And that was it. I mean, we just didn't know. He didn't talk about it, So when the book came out, my mom brought us a copy of the book from New Orleans, and she said, read this. And it was full of signatures from every vet. And I tried to read it, but it just didn't sink in. So my mom had passed away. My dad was kind of working with Tom Hanks and the guys on the movie. And he had lived with me for quite some time then. He didn't have to, but he did. And he was going somewhere. And he would come home and I'd say, where have you been? And he said, ever heard of a guy named Tom Hanks? And I said, well, yeah. And he goes, who is he? And I said, well, he did this movie and that. He said, he's doing a movie on that book your mother gave you. And I thought, oh my gosh, I better go get that book out. And he said, we're going down here to, look at what they've put together so far. Next thing you know, the movie's put together, and he said, some people are coming over to the house, and, I just want you to know. We're going to have a couple people. I said, well, should we get some food? No. So my sister says, we ought to get some food. So we put out, a kind of a big spread. And the next thing you know, we've got limousines, HBO, People Magazine, Seattle Times. It's a big deal. And Neil, his actor, comes, and his girlfriend, and a dog, and all this stuff. And we lived on a cul-de-sac. And my neighbors, are like calling me, going, what's going on? I said, it's this movie, and they're coming around. We lived on a golf course, and they're coming down my backyard on the cart path, and they're like trying to look, and I'm like, yeah, your guess is as good as mine. So that was our, oh, my dad, he's got this movie. Well, the movie started, and then I think 9/11 happened, but we sat every Sunday night, my dad and I, and watched the miniseries. And that was my experience of learning about my dad's war time. And so it was very interesting. I got to ask a lot of questions. It was very loud, very gory, and that's, how I kind of understood what that Purple Heart was all about, and the 4 holes from the 1 bullet. So we had a lot of time together after that to talk about it before he passed away, and we did a lot of, going to different things like this. When I took him and he would sit on the panel, it would be him up here, and I'd be out there watching him answer the questions. So it was amazing. I mean, it totally changed our lives as a family because, he was just my dad. That was all. He was just my dad. He was my hero, but he was my dad. Now all these people are like, oh my gosh, you did that. So that was great. Your turn.
Before we go on, can we say one thing? Tracy, explain to us how you get 4 holes for 1 bullet.
Well, that's what we wanted to know. So the bullet goes in one side of your
Gluteus
glute.
maximus.
Is there a whiteboard we can just draw this on?
It goes in your left cheek and out your left cheek and in your right cheek, and it got lodged in there. So the 4th hole, that makes 3, and the 4th hole was to get it out.
I was assuming that was the case,
Yes.
but I just,
Yeah.
Were you wanting
Well,
Kyle to
and,
demonstrate?
Kyle,
No,
you
no,
can stand up and
It's not really funny because, any closer, he was so lucky throughout the whole war that he made it home, and with minimal injuries. But, the 4 holes from the 1 bullet, that...
In
So it's a
25 years, I have never heard it discussed in such detail.
Well,
I'm not going to ask if you actually saw it. But,
no, we'll talk later. We don't know what we saw.
I don't have any 4 hole stories.
Go for it.
Like Tracy, we learned about my grandfather's experience on Sundays with the rest of the world. When the book came out in '92, I was tearing up LSU. Girls and beer were the priorities, and passing grades. And I came home one Sunday like a good college student with my dirty clothes and to get mom's lunch, and she handed me the book. And same thing, she said, your grandfather jumped on D-Day. What's that have to do with Miller Lite? And so like a good college student, I turned to the back, and Roe is on 3 pages of Band of Brothers. And I read those in 90 seconds. And I remember slapping the book shut and handed it back to my mom. And I guess subconsciously I thought, well, obviously he didn't do anything in the war, because if you're only on 3 pages of World War II, you weren't around much. So fast forward to the series, we knew Shane, who played Roe, had reached out to Roe's second wife and my aunt. But again, no grasp of what this means. We were very lately informed that we could attend the premiere in Normandy in June of 2001. And so we scrambled, got there, and somehow there was like 12 of us from the family who went, and we signed in with HBO at the hotel. And I was at the front, and I said, we're with the Roe family. And the girl goes, oh, you're gonna love episode 6. It's all about your grandfather. I said, why would it be about my grandfather?
Wow.
No clue.
Wow.
No idea. And so that was the first introduction. And I remember meeting a lot of the actors, who a lot of them were unknowns, not the big names, just the guys who, and I would shake your hands. If you ever shake someone's hand and they shake your hand back at you? And I'm Chris, I'm one of Doc Rowe's grandsons. I'm like, oh man, it's so good to meet you. I'm like, what is going on? But they had known from the research, from the writing, from talking to the other vets, they knew more about my grandfather than I did from his World War II experiences. So for me, like Tracy and like George and like Henry, it was life-altering for me. It started me on a trajectory. I'm really the biggest fan of our family, of this. This has become a daily part of my lives. These are people that I talk to on a regular basis. I have their paradise patch tattooed on my shoulder, so that I just a daily reminder of what these guys did and who they are. And so it was really life-altering to see him on screen and to learn his life in the war as everyone else did at the same time.
So when you watched episode 6, it was at the premiere, was the first time you saw the whole thing?
So the premiere was episode 1 and a little bit of 2,
Okay.
or is it a little bit of 1 and all of 2? I forget. We just saw a little.
A little bit, but when you finally saw
Yeah,
episode
yeah,
6,
yeah.
that's the first time you'd actually seen it then. So.
No, yeah, and I don't know if it's 6 or 7 where he's in the foxhole and he pauses with the shelling. They're screaming medic, and he pauses. For those of you who remember bulletin boards on the internet before the internet was internet, I remember being angry because I'm like, I can't believe they're because he hesitates, right? Yeah. And I go, I cannot believe they're portraying him as a coward. I was so angry, and I jumped on the bulletin board, and everybody's just raving about this. And I go, like you, I must be too close to this. And then I watched it again when they did the replay, and it was, I thought, was a genius way to show. Here's a guy who's cold and hungry, like all of them were, and shell-shocked, and he'd been dealing with the killed and injured, and it was a human moment. He's just frazzled. He's at his wit's end, but he jumps up and goes. And I thought that was a genius way to show what those guys went through, the human side of it. Alex talked about the humanity of it, which interests me hugely also. And so, yeah, it's tough to watch, your family member and go.
Can I give an example to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
along with what Chris just said? That when you watch the Peleliu landing scene, which I think is brilliantly shot, brilliantly choreographed from a cinematography standpoint, and I've gotten to know some of the actors like Scott Gibson, who played Captain Haldane. Scott's a pretty good buddy of mine. They show Joe Mazzello playing my dad when they're moving inland, and they're about to get up and move past the palm tree line. There's a shell hit. It knocks Joe back into a hole. The other guys start to move forward, and he hesitates, and you see Captain Haldane reach out, Sledge, you got to get your ass out of that hole right now. They'll Die actually wanted to shoot that scene. Sledge, get out of that goddamn, he shoot it like that, and Scott demurred. It was like, wait, I don't think Sledge would have hesitated like that. And he's right. I mean, believe me, I've read parts of my dad's book where he describes landing at Peleliu so many times I know it by heart. And there never was a time where he hesitated and held back when the other guys are moving forward. But it's just that human moment when anybody would have done that. Yeah. So kind of like you, Chris. I mean, I had that moment of, yeah, I'm glad that Scott kind of recalibrated how he handled what he was being directed to do at Joe as they were filming that.
It raises the question, are there those moments for you guys where it didn't match up exactly how? And tell us about that. If it's, because it's your expectations and things like that. And does it...
Yeah, so if you go to part 9, which I think is fantastic, the depictions on Okinawa were, like you said, there were just anecdote for anecdote, and it's incredibly powerful. There's some scenes where he and Snafu kind of get into a cursing match with each other. That didn't really happen. Mm-hmm. He and Snafu. Snafu was this kid from Louisiana. He was not from as well-educated a background as my father.
Rami Malek.
Rami Malek.
Yeah.
Who did a fantastic job. Really nice guy. Really great to meet him. I don't know why they wrote, and Bruce McKenna wrote that episode. Bruce is a really good friend of mine. I love the guy. My family loves the guy. I'm not sure why he wrote that way, but that's when you just kind of step back and let the filmmakers do their thing. But he and Snafu never just got into this shut up. No, why they just come up in, and it just start F you, that didn't happen. But that's just one of those moments that they're trying to do a scene. There's character compression. Not everything is going to be exactly the way it was written.
Yeah, and I think in my case, when you look at Muck and Pincala, when Muck and Pincala were killed, and they have Luz climbing, crawling to the foxhole. If you read the book is more accurate, because what actually happened was my dad had to go get some shovels over at headquarters. So he comes back, and as he's coming back, everybody's getting ready for whatever that night. And Muck and Pincala said, "Hey, Luz, why don't you jump in our foxhole?" And my dad said, "Nah, that's okay." My dad was kind of stubborn. So he said, "Nah, I'll dig my own." So he dug this little slit trench, and, just kind of a 1 feet by 6 feet by a foot deep. And so when the incoming started, he was just in this little slit trench. He survived, and then when when it was over, they said, "Hey, Luz, go and check out Muck and Pinkala." And because my dad did reference, he said there was artillery came mighty close, he said. And so when he went over to their foxhole, he just looked in and it just was obliterated. So he just grabs, he's digging around, he grabs like a jacket or a poncho and pulls them both out. So they were both dead. So that's what really happened. The movie kind of dramatized it a little bit like he was crawling to it, but he actually wasn't. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Tracy, what about?
Well, there are a few, again, you know, I watched it with my dad, so I could ask a lot of questions. He never played darts, so there was there was a scene where, you know, he was playing darts or
What would we do without George Luz?
yeah, and he wasn't left-handed, so he didn't do that. He didn't get a Dear John letter while he was there, but the scene where he drops the helmet, that bothers a lot of people. My husband is always the first one to say he didn't drop his helmet. My husband had a lot of conversations with my dad on Sunday mornings before we would take my dad to church. You know, that's Hollywood. My dad was a child actor in Hollywood. My whole family was in the picture business, they called it. And so he understood that. I didn't. You know, I didn't get a job in the picture business. My sister did, but I didn't. So, and I'm not bitter about that, but I guess it's all right. But though, you know, that kind of bothered me. I even asked a few people about that, but, you know, it is what it is. My dad, he came home, thank God, and had a wonderful life and career. So I think he was okay, so.
There's a couple of things on the historical side, but while Tracy was talking, I was just thinking of a couple of things. When you see Shane squatting on his heels, like up against a tree in the Bastogne episodes like that, it's funny because my mom said, you know, he did that in real life. He would squat on his heels, and his mom did the same thing. And Shane had no idea that he was reenacting something very real and very characteristic of my grandfather. So I thought that was interesting, kind of that weird, you know, connection that this series, almost metaphysical, if you like, spiritual connection. You know, there was another part where when we started meeting the men, you know, I had a couple of them, Garnier and those guys would, your grandfather was an angel, which, you know, is high praise. These guys, I'm sure Alex can talk for an hour talking about how these guys did not give praise that was not warranted. They may not say anything to you or talk bad about you, but they never offered praise that was not warranted. And so to have those guys say things, use the word angel, in Foley's words in the book where, you know, when you called for medic, he was there, and how he got there, you often wondered. So I think that was a characteristic of him in his real life. And I was talking to Shane, who played him, and Rick Warden. There was a scene where Rick is Welsh, is coming into Bastogne. He's on the hood of the Jeep, and Shane hovers over him as an explosion happens, and the debris is coming. Of course, it's sponges, right? And that was just Shane says, nobody told me to do that. And Welsh says, nobody told him to do. He just instinctively covered me to protect me because I had to lie there motionless because I was wounded, and that was Shane being Shane. But I'd like to think that was Shane being Roe.
Well, let me build on that and ask about the relationship between the actor and the families. How is that sort of developed? How has it continued to the present day? And maybe you can even talk about how, from what you can tell, playing these men, what it has meant to these actors.
Let me go back. You know, I still talk to Shane. He's terrible about replying back on social media, but you know, I still call him Brother Shane, and he calls me Brother Chris. course, we have this running joke because when he sends a message, he'll have BC for Brother Chris, and then I have BS for Brother Shane. And he likes to remind me. He goes, "How did I get the short end of this abbreviation thing?" You know, it's hugely special. You know, he's as much family as anybody else, and so you know that relationship, and I think a lot of us have that. That these guys have become part of our family. You know, it may be since he's a British guy and we don't see each other but once a year, once every 2 or 3 years. But as soon as we're back together, it's just like we've been friends for 20 years, which essentially we have. I captured a great moment when we were going to the premiere in June of 2001 to Normandy, where Shane gets off the bus for the first time. You know, we took the bus. The fancy people took a train down to.
You took the bus?
Yeah.
Why'd you take the bus?
We're from Louisiana, man. This is,
we got the
Henry
train.
already told you where we are in the pecking order of the 50 states. We were last. We were one of the last ones. So anyway, so Shane gets on the bus, and so it was just a great moment where he hugs my aunt, and so that was the first time our families met, and I love that picture. And those guys have amazing stories of their careers that were launched from Band of Brothers, because almost all of them were nobodies, and so that's a whole nother thing. But they've all gone on to where they have gone because of Band of Brothers, and they'll tell you that almost to a man. So.
Well, so Neil McDonough played Buck, and Neil and my dad became really close, and they talked a lot on the phone. You know, I feel like all of the actors did their research if their vet was still alive at the time. Neil was not married to Rouvet yet, but they got married and went on to have 5 children, I think. And so Neil came to my dad's 90th birthday party, and quite a few of the actors came up. You might want to tell that differently too, but it was quite fun. We got a private jet, went down and picked up some actors and brought them up, and then took them back. But Neil tells the story of how they call one of his kids Young Buck. He said, "Do you think they'd call him Young Neil?" No, they call him Young Buck. So there was really a great connection. He and my dad used to joke that, okay, I've played you as a soldier or, you know, military, and he played a detective and a police officer, and he goes, "You've yet to play a judge, Neil, so you've got some work to do," you know. And I don't know that, I don't really follow Neil's career much, but Neil came and spoke at my dad's funeral. We had 2 funerals for my dad, and Neil asked, he said, "Which one should I come to?" And I said, "Well, the big one at the church." So we had one for the coffee group and then a big one at the church, and Neil came up, did that one. So they're very close, or they were. So I appreciated that very much.
But as a follow-up to that, you know, Tracy and her sister put together a wicked birthday party, 90th birthday party.
I mean, private jets, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Oh, man.
how did you have a private jet at your party?
Yeah, so she knows people who have things like that.
I knew somebody.
Right?
They offered, I didn't ask.
Yeah, that was really cool. My wife was going on a humanitarian mission at the same time, and I was going to Seattle to his Buck's birthday. So it was really, really cool. And I remember getting there, and I said, "Don't tell your dad I'm coming." And so we get there, and there's this big long line, and I'm just kind of standing directly in his sight of vision. And I'm just standing there, and there was just a little blur window. He looked up, and he saw me, and he smiled. And I said, "That's why I came all this way, to be at that party." So that was really cool. That was such a great party that you put together for your dad. And a bunch of us were there. But yeah, back to Rick. Yeah, I had a great relationship with Rick. You know, he did an amazing job portraying my dad. And Rick and I are kind of like high school buddies. You know, you don't see each other that much, but when you see each other, it's kind of like you get right back into the swing of things. And I was very fortunate. My wife and I, Susan, went to the set to watch some filming. And I got a chance, with the help of Joe Hobbs, who was the main costume guy, we flew out, we went to the set, he brought the actors to the hotel. Rick, James Matteo, who played Frank, and I think Richard Spade, who played Mark, was there. So, and then I was able to go to the set, and then he introduced me to all the actors. So it was really cool to meet all these actors who I kind of knew their real guy. And now I wasn't Luz, but I was Luz's kid. So it was great to meet all the actors, and like Chris said, we've built this relationship with them over the years since then. So it's really cool, and I know we were all part of the 20th anniversary. Were you part of the 20th anniversary? Yeah.
In New Orleans?
Yeah. Yeah. We were all part of the 20th anniversary of Band of Brothers, so, and it's the 25th is coming up, so we hope to be part of it again.
Tracy knows people.
Okay, cool. She knows people with private jets, too. So.
It was the airport, the whole airport.
Well, so on the Pacific side of it, it was just a really different dynamic. My dad died in 2001, but he was already a pretty famous guy because of his book. And so when Joe Mazzello was selected to portray him, he called us on the phone. We had some conversations. I think from the physical standpoint, they couldn't have found anybody better. He just absolutely nailed that same appearance that my dad had, a striking resemblance to my father. I've interacted with some of the Pacific actors in recent years. Joe has not been one of them, but then Fox Nation did a documentary when my book came out here a few months ago about my father, and then I was a big part of it with Joey Jones. And Joe, they interviewed Joe Mazzello for that, and it was my wife and I were watching it, and it was a wonderful interview because, like I said, I've interacted with some of the Pacific actors and had heard nothing from Joe Mazzello. And then to see him, and he said, playing Eugene Sledge was probably the most important role of my career. And Joe's had a pretty good career. Yeah. And so I thought that's cool that he stepped up and did that. That was meaningful to my family. But yeah, I mean, to have that unit integrity that my Band of Brothers friends had with their actors, we didn't really have that, but like I said, as I've gotten my own book out there and done more podcasting and speaking in appearances and things, I've interacted with some of the guys, and Josh Baton, who was in episode 1 and 2, he was Bassilone's buddy. He's like, Henry, your dad's book was fantastic. We couldn't have done it without your dad's book, And I mean, Josh is an awesome guy, a really good buddy of mine. But it's just a different dynamic, but no less special than what my friends here experienced.
Yeah.
But to encapsulate, I think Joe did a really strong job.
And it's interesting because a lot of these actors have sort of carried that legacy. I know a lot of them go on tours with the National World War II Museum and other companies. This fascination. Here we are 25 years later. People still love these shows. They still want to go on these tours. They want to see them. They want to walk these grounds. What is it that you guys, what do you think it is that has made this series resonate so much for all these years? I mean, we're going on 25 years now. And Henry, we'll start with you. What is it that makes it continue on like this?
Well, I think that, we encapsulate the European experience, the ETO experience, and the Pacific experience. We carry the legacies of our loved ones forward. Band of Brothers, the Pacific, these things resonate because they are, I think, honest and horrific depictions of a vestige of combat, what it was like to experience that in World War II. No film can tell the entire story. I think we would all agree with that, but you have to have something, not everybody reads books. I wish more people did read. I have a 17-year-old. I'd give anything to see him read a book and do something besides TikTok videos.
Oh, amen.
But they engage with history in their own way. And I've seen my son, he had a girlfriend, thank God he doesn't have her anymore, but he watched the Pacific with her. Yeah. And I've seen him watching parts of it with some of his buddies. And so he's very appreciative of who his grandfather was, but I'm trying to stick to your question, why does it resonate? Because they can sit there and see it graphically in front of them, and just like anybody can watch Band of Brothers or the Pacific and see this is what World War II, this is maybe a sliver of what it could have been like. And then you hope that it goes from there a little deeper. Maybe somebody will want to read Band of Brothers Or maybe a kid will want to read Chris's book, or maybe somebody will want to read my book and learn stuff that got edited from my dad's book. And if you could just get a finger hold with somebody and take it a little deeper and get more people interested in it, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. George, what do you think?
Well, I think, you know, the reason it resonates for, 25 years and 20-some years with the Pacific is because it showed real people. And, people can really equate to that. In my particular case, everybody in my age had a dad who served in World War II, practically. And so then you got grandfathers, and you got great-grandfathers for the next generations down. So, yeah, they can look at that and just say, wow, that's, and look at the personalities and look how HBO captured it. And John Orloff wrote a great article about why Band of Brothers still is where it is today. And he focuses on several things, and one of them is the 1,000 or so people who worked on that over the course of however many years it was. But what really was, it was the personalities, it was the people, it was the soldiers who were side by side and would do anything for the guy in the foxhole next to him. And that's why it resonates. And
that comes across so clearly in the show.
Yeah, so we're blessed.
Absolutely.
I think I agree. I definitely agree with that they were regular guys, and they just, HBO developed their characters, and, the high school that my daughters went to, the teachers there used it as a teaching tool, and, kids would be at the video, you had to rent videos back then, and they'd be at the video counter renting Band of Brothers, and I'd walk up and I'd be like, oh, you renting that 10-part miniseries, are you? And yeah, this man came to our history class and talked to us about, and I'm like, oh, really? Was he like old and kind of curmudgeon, yeah, and I'm like, well, that's my dad. And they're like, oh my gosh, Mom, so I just think it's, as bad as it is, the war and everything, I just think it was very likable, the characters, and I think they did a great job wanting you to watch all the way to the end, and yeah, I still watch it.
All of that, and I'll share something from a different angle. From the very beginning, and Tom Hanks should take a lot of credit for this, his passion is what set Band of Brothers for their entire year of filming. And he said it with Eric Jenderson, who started the first writer. But I'll tell you a couple of stories. For instance, the detail that went into it. They had original 101st Airborne patches, which Alex said won the war by themselves, from World War II. They counted the threads of the patch so that when they reproduced the patches for the uniforms, it was exact. Is either Joe Hobbs or one of the other costume guys flew from England all the way to Camp Toccoa because they have an original PT shirt, and they counted the threads on the shirt so that when they recreated the shirt. So that's the sort of mindset that just completely set the tone for these guys. And when you listen to these guys talk, Donnie Wahlberg, who played Lipton, who was a big name already, right? And he was really good about calling Lipton the night before and saying, hey, this is what I'm shooting tomorrow. And Lipton said, yeah, that's great, except I wasn't there. It was a patrol or something. He's like, I wasn't on that patrol. So Donnie Wahlberg, who's a big name, and if you're an actor, your life depends on you being on the screen. It doesn't do you any good to be sitting behind the camera. You've got to be in front of the camera. And Donnie came to set the next day and goes, I'm not in it. So for a guy to say, pull me out of this scene because my man said he wasn't there and I'm not going to be there when he says no. I mean, that mindset is just and the actors talk about going to, they'll go to do things 20 years later. Or the writers, tell me about, other people in their industry are like, tell me about Band, which happened 25 years ago. And they said, this is what we did. And HBO was very hands-off. And they said, this is your gig, you do it. And the executives are like, that'll never happen again. That's not what we're doing on this thing. It was, I just told you what made this thing so good, and you're going to throw it out the window. But it's that mindset from the very beginning, and they had a big speech at boot camp. You know, Tom Hanks came in and just gave those guys a speech, and they said, you're going to have people who are not going to read these books, but they will watch this series.
Absolutely.
And so this is important, and it was.
Absolutely. And we'd like to open up for questions for folks. We've got microphones here on either side. In order for the live streamers to be able to see and hear each question, we'd ask that people come up and ask their question into the microphone so that we can kind of maximize the amount of questions. It might be, if there are multiple people, maybe just to form a line in each aisle. And in the meantime, while you guys want to think of your questions and start coming up, I did have one question. You guys mentioned Captain Sobel's, was it son or grandson had come to one of the events? Like how, after that, you know, his role in that show.
That had to be tough.
That had to be an awkward experience, you know?
Well, one of the things, well, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So one of the things about that was, okay, it was the Phoenix reunion in 2022.
2002.
That's right, yeah, 20 years younger. Yeah. So anyway, Garnier, who was running the reunions at the time, whether he had invited him or not, or he came, and Garnier wanted him on the final night of the banquet to tell us about his dad. And it was really cool because he told us about his dad aside we didn't know anything about. And so I'm sure, like you said, it was probably a weight on his shoulders in the anticipation of going there. So, and I'm sure at the end, he felt a lot better about it.
Yeah.
Wow. Let me pick up on that because, yes, we've got Herbert Sobel, but what about Norman Dyke? How is that played with what you know?
I love it when you're the scene where your dad's doing the imitation. So Dyke comes up. He's got no helmet, no gear, no nothing. Sort of, what the? You go for help. I'm going to get here. You're like, yeah, shut up, Luz. You know, it's one of my favorite
Don't
scenes.
say that anymore.
But and it also goes beyond that, though, because look, the band of brothers. We're all band of brothers, but in reality, there are conflicts within this group, and there are those who don't get along with each other, and then how that's portrayed on film. And so we've got Nixon and Buck Compton, and I know that there's a conflict there.
There's no love lost there. Yeah. They. My dad didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Dyke or Nixon.
Okay.
So I recently found my dad's diary that he kept. So I came across a box in my sister's garage, and he's got a little diary and some letters, a couple letters to his mother. And so the way my dad wrote it was that Nixon didn't like jocks because he was, studious, and my dad was very smart, but he was also very athletic. And so Nixon had the guys all run in their regular physical education or whatever attire, but he had my dad running in wool, everything, and he's like, I knew the guy was out after me, and so he had to do it. But it's funny to read this letter he wrote to his mother in 1944, and it just said, "Send more T-shirts." So he said, we've been out running, and I'm in my wool stuff, and on the back of the little thing it says, "Send more T-shirts." I thought, okay, that kind of coincides with what he wrote in his book. My dad did a memoir in 2006, I think, which I'm very grateful for. And he talks about that with Nixon, how Nixon really put him through the ringer. But he survived it, and he didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Dyke, and I'm just going to leave it at that. You can go read his book. It's called Call of Duty. And he talks a lot about Dyke not being where Dyke needed to be when Dyke needed to be there. And they kind of show that in the movie, and I think it's the part where, Neil drops the helmet. And my dad had just seen the guys lose their legs, and war was at its worst for my dad, and he eventually gets taken off the line, and he goes to different areas, and anyway, Dyke was not a happy name in our house. Talk to my husband after this thing. My husband has a lot of things that he and my dad talked about that about Dyke.
Well, I didn't know your dad had a beef with Nixon.
Nixon had a beef with my dad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it came up at a reunion where
Yeah.
he called him a coward, and that's why he got shot in the butt.
Oh, okay.
He said you were running away from something.
Well, he
and
got
you
shot on the side, though.
You got shot in the butt.
Yeah, but it was on the side.
Whatever.
Flank.
There was a lot of alcohol at reunions, and
Oh, yeah.
you know, I don't know. I wasn't there again. Was not
And
there.
George, we covered how that shot took place.
Yeah, yeah.
It took
That's
place,
been-
yeah,
that
so
was
he
part
was
of-
running
earlier.
this way,
Get
and
a
it kind of went
playback
that
of
way.
that for George.
Yeah.
Right? Went that way. I'm not an engineer or anything like that, but I can tell if you're going this way and it comes that way, and
Came
that's
in
how
from
it
the
could happen.
side.
Yeah, George.
Could happen.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
So we have no questions from the audience? All right, come on up, guys.
Come on,
Yeah, this is
don't
your
be shy.
opportunity.
Hey, so I'm 29 years old, and I'm fully aware that my good life that I have is entirely because of your relatives and men like your relatives. And I guess the era that I've been born in is these men are starting to become pages in a history book. And my, I guess, mission is to make sure that they're remembered, that this generation of heroes is remembered, and that they don't just become words on a page. And so my question for you all is, how do people like myself, the next generation, how do we keep these men alive? That people will look at them not just as words in a history book, but real tangible people that had things to lose, that were just like us, that what they did gave us what we have. So I guess my question is, how do we pass that baton and make sure that they just don't become words on a page?
I will tell you on December 5th, I will go back and visit a school back home. I live in Dallas, and it's about 2 hours away, and I will drive 2 hours to a school that teaches, or a high school teacher, who invited me back, who shows Band of Brothers to a classroom, and wants someone to come and say, a face with a name. Now, I'm lucky because I'm a relative of that, but it will be your mission to find those. Kids love artifacts, right? So if you accumulate some pieces, even if you just go to a local museum, build a relationship with a museum where you can borrow some things, learn about the provenance of those items and explain it. And then you can be the kid in 30 years that goes to a classroom of kids younger than you and say, let me tell you some stories about some guys. Here's some things from the tools and the weapons and the helmets and the uniform and the patches that those guys have. So your job is no different than ours. It's just not firsthand, but even for us, our own information is secondhand. Tracy got her, ours is secondhand to a degree. We watch Band of Brothers and learned. So your mission is just to find some things that will reach kids, learn enough. You don't have to be a historian to help. You don't have to, it helps. But you be the next guy who goes to classrooms in middle schools and high schools and tells the story of these men.
And you can begin that process by enrolling in the master's program.
And still be the best Christmas present for me is to enroll in the Masters of History here. So.
and
But,
then, go
yeah,
ahead, Tracy.
I just continue to say their names. Just continue to say their names and try to keep the stories going wherever you are, whatever you're doing with your life.
And one other thing on that too is I look around whenever I do a speech or something like that. I tell people, I said, hey, why don't you look in, this is my story about my dad and his buddies, but look at your grandfather, your great-grandfather. And the cool thing about today is, if he was in whatever unit it was, if you just Google that one unit, you'll find out all kinds of information. And that will be, like Chris says, that'll be the spark to do that, to look in, to go a little bit deeper. So that's what I always encourage, is look deeper into where you're going.
And I would say if you know somebody who served, if there is anything they have, any piece of equipment, anything that is in the family's home, that is a tactile representation of that experience. Fortunately, I have a lot of my dad's stuff. Some of it's about to go to the museum in New Orleans. Some of it's already in Texas. But anything, and if the relative is still alive, which a World War II veteran probably won't be, sadly, but you can engage, like, what did you carry in this? Was this your pack? What did you carry in this? And I know my dad and I had some great conversations, which I'll talk about in there, but that's maybe more a roadmap for succeeding generations of veterans, because the World War II guys are just sadly just pretty much gone now. But like they're saying, say their names, read the books. There's some great YouTube content out there. There's some YouTubers doing some fantastic content out there that engages people to a surprising degree.
Thank you.
Great question.
Good question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. This isn't so much as a question as an observation and a little bit of sharing, if you don't mind. One, you are so fortunate to have dug into your family's history, and sharing it with us today has been heartwarming. And a story I'll quickly share about my dad, born in 1918, he was at Pearl Harbor, and I was watching the Pearl Harbor movie with him. And we were very quiet. My dad was one of those stoic types. He never talked about the war. And so after the movie, I said, "So, Dad, what did you think of that?" And he said, "Well, it wasn't really like that." And I said, "Well, what was it like?" And he was at Schofield Barracks early Sunday morning. The bombing started. He got in his Jeep with some men, and they went to a communication outpost. Whatever communications, they had with the president or Washington, D.C., what was going on, we didn't get into that. But he did say that afterwards that they patrolled the beaches. He had beach patrol duty for like 3 months because they didn't know if the Japanese were coming back. So communications, just, the delays of the mail and the letters, and so all of the families at home didn't know if, their sons or daughters, were alive after this. So, but just hearing your movie storytelling and that little bit my dad shared with me, and I wish I had more information. And it wasn't until I wrote his obituary that I put his military history together. And so he retired as a Chief Warrant Officer, W4, Pinks and Greens, go Army. So thank you for letting me share that.
Absolutely. And it's why we need Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg to
Yeah.
tackle Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Yeah, and also I think the Smithsonian has a program where everyday people who remember bits and stories of their family can record that history.
Library of Congress.
Yes, Library of
Library of
Congress,
Congress,
thank you. So for all of those that you're interested in doing that, I would encourage.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that.
Jason?
Yes, sir. I told Henry before the talk that my son's 4 years old. We brought him home from the hospital. I had 3 books in his room on his bookshelf waiting for him, in the Bible, the Constitution, and With the Old Breed. And because those, if you haven't read With the Old Breed, which I can't imagine you haven't, it's a must. Question for Henry. I think one of my favorite scenes from With the Old Breed was with Captain Haldane. It's probably the only time I've cried in a war movie was that scene. Can you go into your dad's recollection of Captain Haldane?
Yeah, are you talking about in the Pacific when he was killed?
Yep.
Or?
Yep, when he was killed.
Yeah, Captain Haldane was the personification of this compassionate, charismatic leader who was loved by his men. And my dad, when I was researching, going through the unpublished material to do this, of course I read With the Old Breed multiple times because I wanted to make sure that I didn't just copy that into this. It had to be my own thing. But in Dad's book, he talks about how, they're on Pavuvu training for Peleliu, all right? And he hadn't been in theater that long. And it's a late afternoon thunderstorm. It's gloomy. There's trucks and tanks just trudging. They're marching along this muddy trail. And they're just trudging along. They're wet. They're forewarned. And this guy, it's Captain Haldane, comes walking along the line. And my dad wrote, and he and I talked about this, how he felt a warm glow inside him when this guy, you're from the South, aren't you? And they start talking. And he said, Captain Haldane made me feel like a human being. He made me feel like I was more than just this caged animal being trained to fight. I've told this story, and it's hard to do this, but I want to, because of what you shared with me, all right, the depth of what my dad thought of Akak Haldane. When my dad died, my mom said, "Can you see Akak?" She was standing there with him, saying, "Can you see Gran? Can you see Pop?" That was my grandparents. can you see ACAC? Now, I haven't told that story many times. I told it on a podcast with Bruce McKenna, actually, and I became so emotional I couldn't get through it.
Yeah.
But that literally one of my dad's last things. And my mother, and then she walked out of the room, and I was actually the only person with him when he actually passed away. But for her to say, can you see ACAC?
Yeah.
I mean, that, you know, I have said part of, you know, Snafu, ACAC, Hillbilly, those names were part of my childhood. I mean, because my dad talked about those guys, and I know that's how much he thought of Captain Haldane.
Wow, amazing. Question real quick for the Band of Brothers folks. Can you say anything about Ronald Spears? He was my favorite character.
You know, I was interested. I was listening to I re-listened to the HBO podcast, and when you one of the things that I found fascinating was Spears was not part of the reunions and things for all those years, as far as I could ever heard. And Spears almost would not come to Normandy in 2001 because he was still concerned that the French would bring up the statute of limitations on his war crimes. And that's a true story. And Winters told him he was stupid and he should come. And Winters is really the only reason Spears came back to France in 2001. But the person, what they said was Spears was a ruthless killer, but he believed in the cause. I keep referencing Alex, he's going to think I've got an obsession with him or something. But he was a ruthless killer and knew the quickest way for him to get back home and for the end of this war was to kill as many Germans as he could. And that was his belief 100%. And so, yes, Winters did confirm that, yes, he did kill those Germans. The situation portrayed in the series was maybe a little bit different, maybe a couple of days later. The whole cigarette thing was dramatic, but he did kill those guys because that was their mission, right? They're paratroopers. We don't set up a camp. We're moving forward. We don't sit around here and watch 4 guys and hold up, 10 of our men. His reputation was earned.
No, you're exactly right, because in Walter Gordon, he was interviewed by Ambrose for the book, and I've got the entire tape, which is really great to listen to. And he talks about there was kind of an written rule about we're not taking prisoners. Mm-hmm. You don't have the what we need to take care of prisoners. And what Spears did is kind of what you had said, Alex, about when things go in a certain direction, you have to react. And they knew he couldn't take prisoners, and this was his opportunity to make sure that got taken care of. As difficult as that was to watch, it was his responsibility to make sure that these prisoners were not going to come back and get us. So I'm going to take charge and do it. And, it had to take a lot of courage to do that, but in a difficult spot, he rose to the occasion, because that was, we're not taking prisoners. And, when you're a guy 17, 18, 19 years old, and they're saying, we're not taking any prisoners, you think, oh, gee whiz, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. You know what that means. Right. So Spears really stepped up in that case.
Absolutely. We'll have our one last question before we wrap up.
So I first wanted to say thank you guys for being here. We all really enjoy it, getting to learn from the greatest generation. So my name is Sam Overman. I'm an Army vet. I'm a student at the Citadel, veteran. And, the school teaches us principled leaders. And so, ma'am, on behalf of your father, Buck Compton, he was an athlete. What did he take from his ability to play sports into his leadership in the Army?
Ooh, well, I think throwing that grenade. Right? Very well placed.
So he can make this throw to second base.
Yeah.
Because he was a catcher. So.
He was, he was strong, and he could last. He could. I don't want to say that way. He was a leader. He was a leader. he was strong as an ox, you know, and that went on until way into his later years of life. When he was really old that it was sad to see him not be very strong. You know, he had a leadership mentality, and he got that from ROTC and all of his sports. He played with Jackie Robinson. He played football, baseball. You know, he was just a leader. And I don't know, he attributed a lot to baseball. So if you've not read his book, you can get it on Amazon, because we just got one for somebody else. It's a great story. So I don't know that I can tell you how that helped, you know, get him through the war and that, but he had gigantic arms. I mean, you know, like Popeye, you know, but he talks about that at the Breakcourt Manor when he throws that grenade, because he had no equipment. He'd lost it all on the jump. And then he got a Tommy gun that didn't work. So he had a grenade, and he loves to tell the story about how he lobbed it high and long, and, you know, that's baseball, his terms of, you know, and he blew the guy's head off. So that's not very ladylike. So to talk about, you know, but he was a jock. He was a jock.
Well, and I think too, in your dad's case, I think there's a lot of lessons learned in playing sports, and especially team sports. And, you know, all kids can learn a lot from that. And I think that, you know, that was probably the beginning of, you know, where your dad came up with those leadership qualities. And plus, he was the catcher, right?
He was a catcher, and, you know, I live in Seattle, so we have Cal Raleigh. So, you know,
but the catcher is the one that really, I played catcher. I was a catcher in Little League, so back in the day. So I know all about being a catcher. But anyway, but in the catcher, you have a lot of control. Yeah. Because you're the catcher. Yeah. You could tell the umpire, pardon me, timeout, if the pitcher's struggling. So in that case, he probably gained a lot of leadership skills just from his sports and then playing football.
Yeah.
At a high level.
Yeah. He's, you know, and he just, my dad was brilliant. He was a really smart man. And that's all, you know, he didn't talk a lot about things. I didn't even know the questions to ask. I just was in awe of this man my whole life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody, thank you for coming out. And please join me in a round of applause for our guest this morning. Thank you.
If you'll bear with me for 1 second, I just have a few closing remarks. First to our panel and our moderators. This deeply and personal and extraordinary stories of individual heroes continues to drive the narrative of World War II, reminding us all of the dedication and sacrifice made by this generation. And as a historian, my hope is that we will all continue to learn these stories to understand better who we are and why we fight and what example we wish to set as a people and as a community. And to that end, I do want to thank again personally Alex Kershaw, who I think is still here. Alex. Mr. James Scott and Dr. Kyle Sinisi. And Henry Sledge. And Tracy Compton. And Chris Langlois. And George Luz, Jr. The conversations that we've had here underscore the vital importance of military history, not just as an academic pursuit, but as a critical tool for understanding leadership and conflict and the human experience. And the question was asked earlier, how do we keep these stories alive? How do we continue to remember these critical people and events? And the answer is quite simple. Support the humanities, fund the humanities, continue to sponsor and read and study and remind everyone around you to do the same. And finally, as you head out today, I just do want to note that we will have our guests will be a bit in the audience here after the event here. We have a few copies of their books if you want to join in the line to sign them. I know Henry Sledge is here, is ready to sign your books if you have them. We'll also have books from Chris, and I believe we've got the first wave for sale as well outside. So please do that afterwards. There may not be any food left, so I think you guys are on your own for lunch, but nonetheless. Let me thank you, all of you, for being here this morning. It's a tremendous crowd. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of our guests, moderators, and guests. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks
Can we get a photo of everybody?
Oh, sure.
That was cool.
for coming. The mics are still hot.
Get a picture?
Can we get a, yep.